it's really a matter of getting good data and all the data you have where you need it, when you need it. Because a lot of times if you don't know where the information is, if there's not a standard in there saying, I can look at this right now, you might get partial data, you might get a snapshot of the data, you might get week-old data. And a week-old, as you well know in this industry, sometimes is just too late. You also need to be able to capture snapshots as you're going through the development. When somebody says, okay, I'm finished with this project, and then a year later comes back, they want to know what was surrounding those decisions that was there. And if you can't capture that and have some kind of a standard to say, now I can look at it a year from now, that information disappears. And if you don't have that information, how are you going to build on it when the next guy comes and takes a look at it?
What's worked and what hasn't when it comes to standards? That's next on World Energy Television. All right, we're back. Thank you for joining us. We're talking about standards. What are standards really for? I mean, what are we trying to accomplish with all of this?
You know, my thoughts are the biggest benefit to standards are the ability to communicate very quickly and easily among the stakeholders in the energy business. And the standards bodies haven't necessarily reconfigured themselves to accept that new world that we're operating in.
There's a lot of granularity, though, in where we need to place the standards to make a difference that'll provide us value. I look at it, and I'll paraphrase some of what you said, Tom. I'd say, again, it's back to connectivity for me. In most of the endeavors in this industry are joint ventures, and so we need connectivity between the venture partners, being able to share technical data from one company to another to ensure that the operating partner is operating the best interest of all the partners. We need a connectivity between the oil and gas energy and the government, and so we need a lot of interaction there, which is not as fluid as it needs to be today. We also need interaction with NGOs. I think that there are other non-government organizations that truly have a role to play in this industry that would benefit from having some connectivity with us as well and integrating into some of their processes. So it's really a question of connectivity.
And then it's also about passing on an efficient legacy to the future workforce. You know, we want them to be, the problems they're going to be facing are much more challenging than the ones that we are faced with today. And why have them reinvent the wheel? Give them an efficient legacy of standards so they can solve the more complex problems of tomorrow.
I think this is a huge issue. You know, our workforce is turning over, and there are many countries now with national oil companies that are acting like large profit entities. That said, you not only need standards, but you need to know they exist. And there has to be, particularly on the business side, there's got to be a good, clear ability to understand the landscape of standards, to make sure that you understand what exists today in the market and that you leverage them where it makes sense and you breach the standards where it makes sense.
And to accomplish that, you really have to have differentiation. I mean, in the technology area, to warrant breaking outside of the mold means there has to be great value generated there, and that there's risk associated with deviating from the norm.
Let's go to D.C. and hear from Bob Greco at the American Petroleum Institute.
Thanks. Yeah, I was looking for an opportunity. Clearly, one of the interfaces that I picked up on was this idea of interfacing with the NGOs, with the government, other bodies. Clearly, as API, we view ourselves as providing that base of expertise so that when the government or an NGO or someone comes to us with an issue, a need where a standard needs to be developed or needs to be updated, we view ourselves as having access to the industry experts who can make the case, who have the data to say that, yeah, we've got a handle on this, or yes, that's an issue, we need to look at it more closely, but keep it within a consensus industry system where you've got the access to those folks and where they're ultimately providing the technical expertise to help educate and hopefully eventually get the government NGO comfortable with our approach.
Excellent points, Bob. Mario, what input do you have on this?
It's been a while since the question was stated, so allow me to say it a different way. What are the benefits of a standard? What is the most beneficial part of setting a standard? And I believe it is the economies of scale. Once you agree on a particular device, and I will speak from my perspective of a hardware company, it's much easier to disseminate it across an entire ecosystem. And that provides economies of scale, therefore lower cost to all members of the ecosystem. And that will include hardware, software suppliers, as well as the system integrators, and eventually the users, the customers, all the companies that are applying the technology. So to me, economy of scale is the answer to the question.
What's worked and what hasn't when it comes to standards? That's next on World Energy Television. Welcome back to World Energy Television. As the old adage goes, if we don't know history, we're doomed to repeat it. Standards come and go. As an industry, we've had some standards applied with little or no success. Some applied in places, but not universally applied or accepted. What standards have not worked effectively in the past? Matt, what's your perspective?
Well, highest on my list is the concept of proven reserves. Calling that something that is such a fuzzy estimate proven created the illusion it was proven.
My exposure to the oil industry is minimal in comparison with the other members of the panel, but it will be clear in everybody's mind, the viewers, standards that failed us in the past, like VHS and Betamax. It was impossible to agree on a single standard, so we created two. We're about to do it again in the same industry when we do high-definition DVD and Blu-ray for the latest and greatest video standards that disseminate multimedia. So to me, the most important part is not to have a perfect standard, but rather to only have one rather than two standards competing for the same spot in the industry, because that increases the cost for everybody involved.
Bob, what's your perspective from the American Petroleum Institute?
Well, we have a broad standards program that we're constantly updating our standards. And one very recent real-world example of an issue was the hurricanes that came through the Gulf of Mexico, Katrina and Rita. We have standards for our platforms, for our drilling rigs, that had never hadn't been designed to accommodate two Category 5s coming through back to back.
Excellent examples. Tom?
Well, you know, standards at work are practical and provide clear commercial value. Standards that don't work tend to be very vague and notional and hard to apply. So to me, you judge the quality of a standard by the fact that it is or it is not adopted.
I think it's challenging for us, though, because we tend to make things too complicated. My experience has been if I create a very simple standard, then I can evolve complex processes from it. If I create a really complex standard, I can enable chaos in the organization.
Yeah, Albert Einstein had a great quote on that. It said, we need to make things as simple as they are, but no simpler.
I agree.
We can't get it down to a level where it just becomes more definition of fact. This is a pair of glasses. So there is a certain level of complexity that's inherent in the data, and I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm just saying we can't reduce it.
It's okay to disagree, Dan, occasionally.
I'll keep that in mind. Every now and then I will. But that's why we need to have a certain level of complexity. Otherwise, the standards, you don't even need them. Yeah.
Well, I mean, the plug, though, in the wall, I mean, look at all the variety that we have in appliances, and the only standard that we have is simply how we interface with the current. And you go, if it was really complex, I think we'd have lost the great variety that we have on the other end.
Take, for example, the way oil is calculated. The API's earliest standard was the 1980 standard, and it was changed in 2004 after 24 years.